So, just a quick review of where RH factors can be a problem. Uh, it is specifically associated with pregnancy, and a mismatch of an RH negative mom carrying an RH positive baby can cause problems for the unborn child. It doesn't cause a problem generally during the first pregnancy. That usually proceeds without any problems. But because of exposure to the RH factor during childbirth, the immune system gets sensitized, and during the second pregnancy, the mother's immune system produces antibodies which can cross the placental barrier and attack the RH positive blood in the baby, resulting in hemolytic disease of the newborn, also known as erythroblastosis fetalis. And I've included the spelling of that at the end of this just in case you run across that term later on. Now, blood typing. The way that we protect from any unforeseen incident, any unfortunate clotting or coagulation to occur, is we type the blood. We take samples and mix them with anti-A and anti-B serum, that is, antibodies against either the A or the B or the RH antigens. And if there is a reaction, which usually is in the form of coagulation, that helps us determine the blood type. Typing for ABO and RH factors is done pretty much the same. The best thing that can be done, even if you have typed it, is to cross match. And so if you're going to give someone some blood, a little bit of the recipient's serum and the donor's blood mixed together can tell you if any of those other 30 different types of antigens are going to come into play with a reaction. Now, what you would see is sort of this clumping that can occur. The reason that this is a problem is that an antibody basically combined two, three, four cells together, and we have blood vessels that are small enough that only a single cell can go through at a time. So if we cause this reaction, then what's going to occur is that the cells are going to be, or this cluster of cells is going to be too large to travel through the blood vessels. They will actually plug the vessels up, the capillary beds, resulting in tissue death. But this reaction also allows us to figure out what type of blood we're really dealing with. So you can see that if a person has type AB blood and you give them the A antigen, or I'm sorry, the A antibodies and the B antibodies, it's going to react with those antigens and you're going to get agglutination from both. Now, that does mean that that person can receive either A or B or O. Type B blood, it's not going to react to the A antibodies. It will only react to the B, which tells us we can give that person type B blood or type O. If we have type A, it's only going to react to the A. If we have type O, it doesn't react to anything. Now, that does mean that this person can only receive type O blood, but it also means that they can give to just about anybody. Some other aspects of blood development and some diseases of blood are going to be discussed here. Developmental aspects, well, we talk about adult normal anatomy, but the fact is that in the fetal bloodstream, red blood cells are made by all sorts of stuff. The liver and spleen are also sites of blood cell formation. It's in the adult, it's after childbirth, I should say, that bone marrow takes over this process of hematopoiesis. You should know that when I'm asking a question about where are blood cells formed, I'm asking about adult. Unless I specified in the fetus, um, I want to know that hematopoiesis is taken care of in bone marrow. There are some differences in fetal hemoglobin. Um, because the baby is doesn't really use its lungs, actually doesn't use its lungs at all. The placenta is functioning as the lungs. Fact is that there's less oxygen getting transported, and so fetal hemoglobin binds to oxygen a little tighter than adult hemoglobin. Um, One thing that occurs because mom's liver is functioning as the baby's liver, we bypass the liver, we bypass the lungs. When the baby's born, the liver is not fully functional. And the hemoglobin, blood cells break down, and shortly after childbirth, a baby can get this yellowish color known as jaundice until its liver kicks in completely. At that point, the liver will start breaking down products fast enough. This is not an uncommon situation and not anything to freak out about. In fact, um, children can be treated for this, and the jaundice can go away quite rapidly using something called Billy lights, which break down the bilirubin. Just basically a full spectrum light that shines on the baby and helps break it down. Uh, the You can take your child and have it in sunlight, and you'll have essentially the same effect. Uh, we also see jaundice, of course, in adults when there is liver damage that has occurred. Now, some diseases and conditions of blood that can arise. Blood becomes too acidic, you have acidosis. Blood becomes too basic, it's alkalosis. And in both of those scenarios, the respiratory system and kidneys generally help restore pH back to normal. If they fail to do so, then you can start having some deficits. A person can appear to behave drunk, even though they've not had anything to drink. We do see situations like this arise in certain conditions, such as diabetes, where someone can become acidotic or alkalotic. If a person is acidotic, we can give them or have them. Uh, I apologize. If a person becomes alkalotic, we see that oftentimes when people are hyperventilating. And the way to correct that is to have them rebreathe into a bag, which will have them rebreathe the carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide actually makes the tissues, makes the blood more acidotic. There are some bleeding disorders that you should be aware of. Thrombocytopenia, and that's a product of a platelet deficiency. And in this situation, even normal movements can cause bleeding from small blood vessels into the tissues. Um, there is something called disseminated intravascular clotting, and this is kind of a secondary, or this leads to a secondary thrombocytopenia. What will happen with DIC is exposure to something that triggers the clotting cascade will result in small clots forming throughout the bloodstream. We've said that platelets bind to connective tissues. One thing that can lead to this disseminated intravascular clotting is that at childbirth, some of the amniotic fluid can get into the mother's bloodstream. This can result in clots forming throughout the body. Again, the same kind of problems that we would have if we had a reaction to blood typing. You're going to get blood clots that plug up all of the vessels, resulting in tissues not getting a sufficient quantity of oxygen and tissues dying off. Now, the downside that happens here, a secondary downside actually, is that once all the platelets are used up in this disseminated intravascular clotting, now you have a thrombocytopenia. And people will start bleeding out of their eyes and ears and nose because now they cannot form the clots that they need. So generally, someone who has developed disseminated intravascular clotting, the survivability is very, very low. It doesn't happen, and those folks are not very long for this world. Hemophilia, this is a hereditary bleeding disorder. We have a number of clotting factors, and we skimmed over those very lightly, but some people may have normal clotting factors that are missing. And this is generally a genetic condition. We see this as a product often of interbreeding. It is known as one of the royal diseases because royalty tended to intermarry, and as a result, hemophilia was quite common. Um, there are varying degrees. It can be fairly minor. There's a condition called von Willebrand's disease, which results in an extended bleeding time. I have a nephew that has that, and for the most part, just an awareness of it. When he had his tonsils out, there had to be some additional care taken, but it wasn't a major thing. It can be quite severe, and one of the most common things that happens is bleeding into the joints, which can be very painful. And this condition may have actually led to the Russian Revolution. Just a little history here, but um, Tsar Nicholas, his son, had hemophilia, and he experienced a great deal of pain because of bleeding into his joints. In hopes of dealing with some of the pain that his child was feeling, Tsar Nicholas employed a doctor, medicine man, whatever, known as Rasputin. And Rasputin was insane. But he insinuated himself into the royal family in such a way that Tsar Nicholas was able to, or he caused Tsar Nicholas to institute some policies that were less than popular amongst the masses. And so this may very well have contributed to the Russian Revolution. Um, Again, it can be relatively mild. It can be, though it's rare, it can be severe enough that a person can bleed out from just a minor injury. Uh, Other disorders, homeostatic imbalances of red blood cells. And anemia is quite common. And the definition of an anemia is a decrease in the oxygen carrying ability of the blood. It does not mean you don't have enough red blood cells. It can be caused by any of a number of things. So there's iron deficiency anemias where you just don't have enough iron in the blood cells. There are vitamin deficiencies, B12 specifically, which results in pernicious anemia. Hemolytic anemias, where you have lost a lot of red blood cells. Um, you can have hemorrhagic anemias, where you have, say, an ulcer that you're bleeding out. There's aplastic anemia, where the cells are just not quite the right shape, uh, don't function well. Now, iron deficiency anemia seems relatively common. Um, it was unusual prior to World War II. Uh, what happened in World War II is that people started donating their cast iron pots and skillets and things like that to the war effort. If you use cast iron, you will have enough iron leach out of the skillet into your food that you won't get an iron deficiency anemia. But in the end, people replaced those with aluminum pots, pans, things like that, which don't give you the iron that you need. Um, Now, sickle cell anemia is one that we will talk about in a little more length. It is a genetic disease which results from some abnormally shaped hemoglobin. Uh, we'll talk about how that works. And then there is a condition called polycythemia, where you have an excess of abnormal red, or not abnormal, but an excess of red blood cells. What this does is it thickens the blood up. And at this point, again, we're going to stop and we will pick up and talk a little bit more about the anemias and polycythemia in our next discussion.